The stars bled tonight. What once were brilliant suns, banners of the Emperor's great crusade, now lay as fading embers in the black ocean of void. Their light, ancient and proud, limped across the dark until even memory seemed ashamed to recall them. Ships hung in their dying radiance, colossal cathedrals of steel, their hulls scarred by 1,000 wars, their banners tattered from the betrayal of sons against their father. In the silence of space, terror waited. It did not wait in patience or in hope, but in a stillness born of exhaustion. The golden throne burned day and night, consuming the Emperor's soul in its endless fire. And beyond the cradle of mankind, a shadow stretched, vast, patient, inevitable. That shadow bore a name, Horus Lupercal. Once he had been the favored son, the War Master, the brother whose victories had shamed the galaxy into kneeling. His words had united legions, his laughter had bound Primarchs closer than blood. It was he who the Emperor trusted with the keys to the Imperium's destiny, and it was he, beloved, brilliant, doomed, who would bring it to ruin. We will speak of that ruin tonight. We will walk together through the dying embers of this age, through halls lit by the glow of ancient betrayal, and we will see how one brother, in loving his father too much and hating him too deeply, tore the stars apart. And before we begin, know this: we truly care for you, traveler of this long night. You, who listen across the distance, are part of this story as much as the Sons of Terror themselves. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now take your place in the quiet void, warm your hands around your coffee, and let us begin. The heresy did not begin with swords. It began with silence. There were whispers in the Great Crusade, soft at first, like the hum of a great ship's reactor, always there, never noticed. But Horus heard them. For all his power, all his cunning, there was in him a heart too open to the pain of others. His loyalty was not cold steel. It was flesh and blood, burning and alive. It was this warmth that made him beloved by his legion, and it was this same warmth that the serpent's tongue would coil around. At the height of his glory, he walked the deck of the vengeful spirit. Its bridge was a cathedral of war, vaulted arches of black iron, thrumming with the power of engines that could shatter worlds. Beneath the glow of hololithic stars, Horus stared at the endless constellations. His armor reflected the light like the surface of a blade. The wolf pelt draped across his shoulders whispered of his campaigns among the ice worlds of forgotten systems. A messenger approached, hesitant, as though nearing a storm. "War Master," the voice said, "the Emperor's summons is delayed. Your orders remain to secure the Melchior Rift." The words were simple, but they tasted bitter. Again. Always again. While Horus bled for the galaxy, the Emperor sat upon terror, consumed by his hidden works, mysterious projects behind sealed doors. Horus's smile was slow, controlled, but there was a shadow in it now. "They say the rift cannot be pacified," Abaddon murmured at his side. His first captain's voice was low, iron in its certainty. "But we are the Lunar Wolves. We will break it as we break all things." "Yes," Horus said, and yet his eyes lingered on the dark between the stars. In those long nights, when the vengeful spirit sailed through silence, Horus's thoughts would wander. Was the Emperor's dream worth the blood it demanded? And if it was, why was the truth of that dream hidden from the very sons who built it? Doubt is a subtle poison. It does not shout, it whispers. The campaign in the Melchior Rift was brutal. The worlds there were drowned in endless storms, their cities little more than rusting spires clinging to jagged coastlines. Horus led his sons to victory, as he always did, but each triumph came at cost. He walked the battlefields afterward, past the broken armor of Astartes, past the blackened shells of war machines. His warriors, so loyal, would kneel before him still, blood on their armor, waiting for a word that would make the sacrifice make sense. He gave them the word. Always. That was his gift. And yet, when he was alone, Horus found the silence heavier than any war. The galaxy whispered to him in other ways. Erebus of the word-bearers came to him in those days. Always the priest, always the friend. His words dripped with poison so sweet, Horus could not taste its venom. Erebus spoke of the emperor's betrayal, of the truth denied to the legions, of the gods who waited beyond the veil, not as enemies, but as liberators. Horus laughed at such tales at first, but laughter has a way of fading when a man's doubts already weigh upon his soul. It was during the siege of the Rift's final bastion, a fortress built into the very bones of a dead moon, that Horus felt the first true crack in his loyalty. In the thick of battle, he stood at the heart of the storm, his mace tearing through armored ranks. The enemy fell, their banners shattered, their leaders cut down. Victory was certain. And yet, when the final gate fell, what Horus found within was not a throne of defiance, but a hall of the dead. The defenders had killed themselves rather than bend the knee to the Imperium. In the ash lay crude carvings, images of a god bound in chains of gold, burning eternally to power a throne. Something inside Horus shifted. That night, in the quiet of his command chamber, Horus placed his hands on the edge of the star map. The constellations glowed faintly, but his eyes were far away. He thought of the Emperor, not as the glorious master of the legions, but as the distant figure on Terra who demanded loyalty and offered secrecy in return. And for the first time, Horus felt the weight of that silence not as discipline, but as betrayal. The vengeful spirit left the rift in victory, but the air aboard her was heavier than before. Horus walked her halls like a man who had glimpsed a truth too large to carry, yet too dangerous to set down. Far away, Terra gleamed like a distant star. Horus's heart beat in time with its light, fierce and loyal still. But beneath that loyalty, the first shadows coiled. The galaxy did not yet know it, but a storm had begun, and it would break upon the Imperium with the fury of a son who loved too much, and could no longer bear the silence of his father. The Emperor's face was carved in gold across the walls of the Strategium. Not as a god, that lie had not yet been spoken aloud, but as the father of mankind, radiant and terrible in equal measure. Light spilled from high, arched windows, filtering through stained plasteel that showed scenes of the Great Crusade's triumphs. In the center of that hallowed chamber stood Horus Lupercal, war master of the Imperium, victorious son of the throne. Before him lay the galaxy. The hololithic map turned in silence, its constellations like jewels suspended in black glass. Whole sectors glowed in imperial gold, stretching from the core to the uncharted dark. Here and there, rebellious systems burned red, blades of defiance against the inevitable tide of unity. Horus had overseen the pacification of hundreds of them. His name was legend, whispered in every war council, prayed to by the terrified and the hopeful alike. And yet, it was the absence of a single voice that weighed on him now. The Emperor had not summoned him in months. The vengeful spirit's victories were acknowledged only by cold communiques, words stripped of warmth. Other Primarchs came and went, recalled to Terra for counsel. But the War Master, the very architect of this grand conquest, remained distant from his father's side. Abaddon stood at Horus's shoulder, the first captain silent as the map rotated. His loyalty was a constant thing, as fierce as any oath, but even he felt the weight of that absence. "You have broken the rift," Abaddon said, breaking the silence. "World after world falls. The other legions sing your name. And yet the Emperor does not call," Horus replied, his voice quiet, thoughtful. He did not turn from the stars. Abaddon's eyes hardened. "He trusts you to carry the weight of the crusade. None else could bear it." "Or," Horus said, and his voice curved like a blade, "he trusts me because I am far away." The words hung in the air like a shadow across the strategium. Horus did not speak them in anger, nor in rebellion. They were simply a truth he could no longer ignore. It was not jealousy that gnawed at him, but something colder, the creeping realization that the Emperor's silence might not be a test, but a dismissal. A summons came days later, not to terror, not yet, but to the world of Dwell. The summons was brief. "Meet me at the edge of the Ashen Belt. There is work to be done." The Emperor's voice was carved into every syllable, neither warm nor cold, as though his words belonged to another age. When the vengeful spirit entered the system, Horus saw his father's ship, the Bucephalus, anchored above the world like a blade sheathed in starlight. No escort, no fleet, only the ship and its master, as if the Emperor's presence alone was enough to cow any enemy. Horus boarded in silence, his steps echoing down the gold-veined corridors. It was strange, no trumpets, no ceremony, only the low hum of the vessel's great heart. He found the Emperor at the prow, standing before the viewing arch, the light of Dwell's burning atmosphere washing his armor in fire. "Father," the Emperor turned. His face was as Horus remembered, stern, radiant, timeless. In his gaze, there was a depth that seemed older than the stars themselves, but no flicker of affection. "Horus," he said, "you have done well." It should have been enough. But Horus, for the first time in years, felt the praise like an echo, distant and hollow. "You summoned me," Horus said carefully. "There are matters you cannot yet understand," the Emperor replied, his voice heavy with the weight of something unseen. "But there is work that must be done, and you will do it." He spoke of a campaign far from the center of the crusade, of threats festering at the edge of mapped space. His orders were precise, his expectations absolute, and yet there was no explanation, no truth to bind the command. Horus listened, but behind his composure, something twisted. When he finally spoke, his words were deliberate. "I have bled across the stars for you, Father. My sons die for this dream, but the dream is kept from us." The Emperor's gaze hardened, though his voice did not rise. "It is not your burden to carry the truth. Your burden is to obey." The silence that followed was not of defiance, but of a son who has been told, again, that love is measured only in obedience. Horus bowed his head. "It will be done." He left the Bucephalus with the Emperor's orders sealed in his mind, his loyalty intact, but a crack, invisible to all but himself, forming deep within. On Dwell, the campaign was swift and brutal. The world was a fortress of black stone, carved into mountains older than its people. The defenders fought with a fanaticism Horus could almost respect. Warriors who believed themselves chosen by gods, older than mankind. When victory came, the skies above Dwell burned for days. Horus stood upon the citadel's broken walls, the wind whipping his wolf pelt into a storm behind him. Around him, the lunar wolves moved with the precision of gods of war, their banners glinting in the firelight. And yet his thoughts were not on the battle won, but on the conversation left unsaid aboard the Bucephalus. Abaddon approached. "We have the world, my lord. another victory for the Emperor's dream. Horus turned his gaze from the horizon. Yes, he said, another victory. But in his mind, the words twisted. Another victory for a dream whose truth is hidden. That night, in the quiet of his command chamber, Horus traced the edge of his mace with a gauntleted hand. The weapon was a thing of beauty, perfect, unerring, built for conquest. It was a gift from the Emperor, forged in a time when father and son spoke without walls between them. Now it felt like a relic of a time that no longer existed. Erebus found him there, as he so often did in moments of silence. "You have seen your father again," the chaplain said softly. Horus did not look up. "I have." "And does he see you, Horus?" The words lingered like smoke. Horus did not answer. Erebus smiled, the kind of smile that did not need one. The vengeful spirit departed dwell. Another world pacified. Another star added to the Emperor's empire. And yet, for Horus, the victory felt less like conquest and more like distance. Terror still shone in the distance, brilliant and unassailable, but its light no longer warmed him. The galaxy was an empire of silence. From the core to the distant edges of mapped space, the legions marched without falter, their banners like suns blazing over conquered worlds. But within that silence, cracks spread, hairline fractures in the perfect order of the Emperor's dream. Some cracks were political, others were human. Horus Lupercal stood at the center of it all. The War Master's name was spoken in every hall of power, sometimes in reverence, sometimes in fear. There were whispers in the shadows of the High Lord's chambers, whispers in the strategia of lesser primarchs, whispers that the Emperor's absence from the crusade had left Horus as the true ruler of the Imperium's armies, whispers that Terra's throne had grown cold. But it was not the flattery that troubled Horus. It was the silence that followed it. At the Council of Carinae, the Primarchs gathered to chart the next phase of the crusade. The room was vast, its vaulted ceiling carved with the history of victories past. Around the table, giants spoke. Rogel Dawn's voice was iron and duty, Ferrus Manus's a hammer striking sparks, Fulgrim's a silken thread of persuasion. And there, in the quiet moments between strategy and command, Horus felt the shifting ground. It began with simple questions. Why was the Emperor not present? Why did he send no word, no counsel, no sign of his vision's progress? Why did he draw the Primarchs into distant wars while he worked in secrecy on Terra? Fulgrim leaned toward Horus during a pause, his voice smooth as polished glass. "Brother, do you not feel it? This distance. It is as though Father builds a throne, and we are but stones in its foundation." Horus's smile was measured. "We are his sons. Stones or not, we hold the galaxy together." Fulgrim's eyes glittered, but he did not press. The remark hung in the air, subtle, dangerous. Later, in the quiet of his chamber aboard, the vengeful spirit, Horus thought of Fulgrim's words, and of Lorgar's sermons, spoken in whispers, dressed in prophecy. It was then that Erebus returned. The word-bearer walked with the patience of a man who knew the strength of seeds planted long ago. He spoke of loyalty, of destiny, of a truth Horus had yet to see fully. He spoke of gods, not the Emperor, but others, who had shaped the galaxy before mankind learned to crawl. Horus listened. He did not agree, but he listened. The political fractures in the crusade deepened. On the world of Rythaean Prime, Horus met with planetary rulers who questioned the tithes demanded of them. Their cities were dust, their resources stripped bare for the war effort, their faith in the Emperor worn thin. One governor, An old man draped in silks that had once been imperial gifts, bowed low before Horus and said, "We serve the Imperium, War Master, but does the Imperium serve us?" The words should have been treason, but Horus, for the first time, did not answer with threat or condemnation. He looked at the ruined city beyond the palace window, at the smoke rising from the manufactorums, and said only, "The Emperor's vision will reward all sacrifice in time." The governor's expression did not change. Time is a gift our people no longer have. That night, as the vengeful spirit departed Rithæan Prime, Horus stood at the observation deck, watching the planet shrink into darkness. His reflection in the glass looked older than before, not in years, but in weight. Abaddon approached quietly. "You are troubled." "I am thinking," Horus replied. "Of the Emperor?" Horus did not answer. Instead, he returned to his chamber, where Erebus waited once more. "You see it now," the chaplain said softly. "The burden you carry is heavier than you were told, and you carry it alone." Horus's eyes narrowed. "I am War Master. I carry what is mine to bear." "But must you bear it without truth?" Erebus asked. The words lingered, dangerous and sharp. The next campaign came swiftly, as if to silence the doubts gathering in the quiet. The crusade moved against the Galmec enclaves, a cluster of fortified systems ruled by Xenos mercenaries. The battles were fierce, sieges that turned whole worlds to ash. Horus fought at the forefront, his mace a hammer of judgment, his voice a clarion call to his legion. Yet every victory came with questions. Why did the Emperor not stand beside his sons? Why were his works on Terra more important than the blood spilled here? Why did the Imperium demand absolute loyalty, but give only silence in return? During the final assault on Galmec Prime, Horus stood in the heart of the enemy's fortress. The air was thick with smoke, the ground littered with the broken remains of war machines. His victory was absolute. But as he stood in the throne room of a fallen ruler, he saw a mural carved into the wall, an image of a god-king abandoned by his children, his crown shattered, his hands bound in golden chains. It was a strange thing. Horus did not know the meaning of it, but it lingered in his thoughts long after the campaign ended. The vengeful spirit sailed onward, its holds full of plunder, its warriors triumphant. But in the private chambers of the War Master, the silence deepened. Terror still shone in the distance, but its light was beginning to look less like a beacon, and more like a throne that turned its gaze away. And in the quiet between stars, Erebus's voice was there, patient as ever. "Every empire falls, Horus, some from without, most from within. The question is, will you be the one to watch or the one to decide?" Horus said nothing, but the storm in his heart grew darker. The vengeful spirit drifted through the cold dark, its armored flanks glinting faintly in the starlight. Within its vaulted halls, the War Master walked alone. The air carried a silence deeper than vacuum. It was not the quiet of peace, but of distance, a gulf between Horus and the figure he had once loved above all others. The Emperor's summons had not come again. No words of counsel, no sign of trust, only orders, passed through intermediaries, couched in cold formality. Horus executed them with flawless precision. Each victory was another jewel in the crown of the Great Crusade, but the crown itself felt far away. Rumors had begun to spread. The Emperor was consumed with a project in the depths of Terra, a work known only as the Webway. Its purpose was a mystery, its cost unknown, its truth forbidden. Even the Primarchs were given no voice in it. For Horus, that secrecy became a splinter beneath the skin. The strategium of the vengeful spirit was dim that night. the galaxy's map casting pale light across Horus's face. Abaddon stood nearby, ever watchful, as the War Master's gaze traced the Imperial holdings. "He builds something," Horus murmured, almost to himself. "Something so vast that even I am kept from it." Abaddon's voice was iron, unbending. "If the Emperor withholds the truth, it is because the truth would hinder the crusade." Horus's smile was faint, sharp, or perhaps because the truth would change it. It was then that Fulgrim arrived, the Phoenician's steps light as if the ship's steel floor was marble in his personal palace. His armor gleamed in the pale glow, perfect and untarnished despite the storms of war. "My brother," Fulgrim said warmly. "It has been too long since we spoke without the shadow of battle upon us." Horus gestured to the galaxy. "The shadow of battle is all we have. But come, Phoenician, what brings you aboard the vengeful spirit?" Fulgrim's smile was artful. "A gift, perhaps, or a warning. I have been to Terra. I have walked the halls where our father locks himself away. I have seen the faces of those who serve him there, and I have heard whispers." Horus's eyes narrowed. "Whispers are cheap, Fulgrim. They are the coin of cowards." Fulgrim inclined his head. "And yet, even the smallest coin has weight, brother. The Emperor builds his webway. Not for you, not for me, not for the legions. It is his alone, a gate to an empire beyond the stars, a realm without us." The words were not accusations, nor even warnings. They were simply observations. But they sank into Horus like hooks. Fulgrim left soon after, his gift delivered. Days passed. The vengeful spirit travelled onward, but Horus's thoughts lingered on Terra's locked doors, the halls where he was no longer welcome. When next he spoke to Lorgar, the conversation was quieter still. The bearer of the word had no artifice, no gilded tongue like Fulgrim's. His words were patient, almost mournful. "Our father hides from us, Horus. He hides because his truth is not the one we were told. He hides because he builds something he cannot share. Do you wonder, as I do, whether the dream he gave us was ever truly ours?" Horus looked at his brother across the hololith, their images separated by light years. "You speak of faith, Lorgar. I speak of war. My legion fights and dies for that dream still." Lorgar's eyes were steady. "And yet he will not even tell you what it is you fight for." The connection ended, but the words remained. The next campaign came like a storm, as though the galaxy itself sought to drown such thoughts in blood. The lunar wolves descended upon the war world of Karan Viv, a fortress that had resisted the Imperium for decades. Horus led from the front, his mace a sun of destruction, his presence unshakable. The walls fell. The defenders burned. Victory was his. And yet, as he stood on the battlements of Karan's broken keep, watching the city smolder beneath a blackened sky, the thought returned, unbidden, unwanted. What was the Emperor building, so far from this place of fire and death? That night, in the quiet of the command chamber, Erebus appeared once more. "You have seen the truth now," the chaplain said softly. Horus did not answer immediately. His hand rested on the map table, fingers tracing the constellations. "He builds something he cannot share," Horus said at last. "Something so important he abandons the legions for it. So important, he abandons me." Erebus's smile was the faintest thing, as if in sorrow. "He abandons you because he fears you might see it for what it is." Horus looked up sharply. "And what is that?" Erebus did not answer. He simply bowed. "The truth, War Master, in time." When Erebus left, Horus remained alone. Outside the viewport, the stars burned cold and bright, distant as the farther he could no longer reach. The vengeful spirit sailed on, the webway a shadow behind Terra's walls, the Emperor silent, and in the heart of the War Master, the splinter of doubt drove deeper. The war on Davin was supposed to be a victory written in blood and certainty. The moon was a dead place, its swamps rotting beneath a haze of disease. Ancient palaces, half sunken in mud, stood as monuments to forgotten kings. The vengeful spirit descended like a hammer from the sky, its guns tearing through the miasma as the lunar wolves deployed in perfect precision. The foe was no ordinary enemy. They were traitors, imperial governors who had turned their oaths into weapons, their loyalty into poison. At their head was a name Horus had once trusted, Yugen Temba, the planetary governor who had bent knee to the War Master in years past. Now his banner flew in defiance, marked with sigils that were older than the Imperium itself. Horus led the assault himself, his voice a clarion call that cut through the fog. The lunar wolves struck like the Emperor's own hand, breaking the enemy's lines, tearing their palaces stone from stone. The battle burned across Davin's swamps until only the central keep remained, Temba's fortress. It was there, in the heart of the ruin, that fate turned. The keep was a labyrinth of cracked marble and stagnant pools. Strange carvings lined its walls, spirals, serpents, suns bound in chains. Horus felt the weight of them as he advanced, his mace slick with the blood of the corrupted guard. And then, in the throne chamber, he met Temba. The governor's body was bloated, swollen with rot, his flesh splitting as if something within strained to escape. In his hands he held a blade, not of human make, a weapon that seemed to drink the light around it. "War Master," Temba hissed, his voice a mockery of the loyalty it once carried. "Our father has no place for you, but the gods do." Horus answered with steel. The duel was fierce, each blow shaking the chamber. But in the chaos, the blade found its mark. It slid past the War Master's guard, cutting deep into his side. Horus staggered, his vision clouding, his breath burning as if fire had taken root in his veins. The lunar wolves surged forward, cutting Temba down in a storm of bolter fire. But it was too late. The blade's wound was more than mortal. Horus fell. They carried him back to the vengeful spirit, his armor dark with blood, his breath shallow. Apothecaries worked without pause, but their arts could not touch the sickness spreading from the wound. The weapon had carried something beyond poison, something older, deeper. Abaddon stood at his side, silent for perhaps the first time in his life. Erebus came then, his expression grave, his voice low. "The wound is not of mortal kind. No medicine of the Imperium will heal him." Abaddon turned on him, fury in his voice. "Then speak of what will, word-bearer, or be silent." "There is a place," Erebus said. "An ancient temple here, on Davin. The Serpent Lodge. There the War Master can be healed. But it is not of the Emperor's way." The words were dangerous, but the alternative was certain death. And so they carried Horus, his body weak, his spirit flickering, down to the temple. The Serpent Lodge was unlike anything the lunar wolves had ever seen. It was older than the Imperium, its walls carved with endless spirals, its floors marked with runes that seemed to shift under the torchlight. At its center was a great stone altar, worn smooth by centuries of forgotten rites. They laid Horus upon it. The air thickened, heavy with incense that smelled of ash and honey. Chants rose from the shadows, robed figures moving in circles, their voices low and inhuman. Horus drifted. In the fevered haze, he saw visions. He stood in a place of endless stars. their light cold and sharp as glass. Before him stretched a path of gold, leading to a throne of impossible height. Upon that throne sat the Emperor, silent, distant, his face hidden in shadow. "Father," Horus called, but the figure did not answer. Around the base of the throne coiled serpents of light and shadow, their voices whispering in words he could not yet understand. They spoke of truth, of chains, of a destiny stolen from him. The vision shifted. Horus saw the galaxy burning, not in defeat, but in transformation. Empires rose not by the Emperor's hand, but by his own. His brothers stood beside him, not as rivals, but as equals in a reign free of silence. The serpents whispered still. "The Emperor will use you and cast you aside, but the gods will make you their equal, their champion, their king." Horus felt the truth of it in his bones. Or perhaps it was the poison speaking. When he awoke, his wound was gone. His breath was strong. His strength had returned. But something else had awakened with him. He left the Serpent Lodge not as the War Master who had entered, but as a man who had glimpsed a truth too vast to ignore. The vengeful spirit rose from Davin's surface, its course set once more for the wars of the Imperium. But in its heart, the War Master's loyalty had shifted, not broken, not yet, but bent toward a new horizon. And far from the swamps of Davin, in the hidden halls of terror, the Emperor still worked in silence. The vengeful spirit cut through the void like a blade. In its grand halls, the banners of the lunar wolves still hung proud. Victories glimmered in every corridor, carved into gold and stone. But something in the air had shifted, subtle as a change in gravity, unseen but felt by every soul aboard. Their War Master had returned from the brink of death. His wound was gone. His strength was undiminished. His voice still carried command like thunder. And yet, there was something in his eyes now. Abaddon noticed it first. To others, Horus was as he had always been, decisive, unshakable, relentless. But to the first captain, who had fought at his side for decades, the difference was as clear as a shadow on glass. Horus's questions about the Emperor no longer carried doubt. They carried judgment. The council aboard the vengeful spirit gathered days after Davin. The strategium table glowed with the hololithic display of the Crusade's next objectives. But Horus's attention was elsewhere. Lorgar stood at his side. Erebus lingered in the shadows, as he so often did. "My brothers," Horus began, his voice calm, steady, measured. "The Emperor's dream continues. We conquer. We bleed. We add worlds to his Imperium. And yet, where is the Emperor?" The question cut through the air like a blade. Torgadon spoke first, his loyalty unshaken. "On Terra, my lord, building the foundation for our future." Horus's gaze did not move from the map. "A foundation we are not permitted to see. A truth we are not permitted to know." Silence settled. Even Abaddon said nothing. Lorgar stepped forward, his tone patient, almost sorrowful. "You have seen what he builds, Horus, even if you do not yet name it. He builds without you, because the truth of his vision cannot bear the weight of your loyalty. He fears it will break beneath your questions." Horus looked at him, the faintest trace of something like amusement, or perhaps bitterness, touching his lips. "And what truth is that, Lorgar?" Lorgar's gaze did not waver. "That the Emperor's empire is not meant for you. It is not meant for the Primarchs. It is meant for him alone. You and your brothers are weapons, nothing more." The room felt colder. Horus turned from the map, stepping closer to the word-bearer. "And what would you have me believe, Lorgar? That the Emperor is a tyrant? That the gods you speak of are his betters?" Erebus spoke then, his voice soft as oil on water. We would have you believe only what you have already seen. On Darwin, in your vision, you saw the Emperor's silence, and you saw the galaxy that could be yours. The words hung heavy in the chamber. Horus said nothing for a long time. His hand rested on the edge of the table, fingers brushing the constellations as though he could feel the weight of every world beneath them. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. I have served the Emperor without question. I have bled across the stars for his dream. I have built his Imperium world by world. And yet he builds his greatest work in secret, with no place for me in it. He looked up then, and in his eyes was not doubt, but decision. If he will not trust me with his truth, then I will find my own. The meeting ended. Orders were given. The crusade continued. But in the quiet of his private chamber, Horus stood alone at the viewport, watching the stars wheel slowly past. He remembered the Emperor's voice, as cold as it had been on the Bucephalus. He remembered the vision from the Serpent Lodge, the throne empty but for shadow, the serpents whispering of destiny. And he remembered something else, the feeling deep in his bones that the galaxy did not need the Emperor's light to burn. In the days that followed, subtle changes rippled through the Legion. Erebus spoke more freely among the captains, his words careful, always respectful, yet carrying the faintest edge of something more. Lorgar remained at Horus's side, not as a preacher, but as a brother, one who understood the weight of disillusionment. Abaddon stood watch, silent. His loyalty was unshaken, but he no longer asked the questions that had no answers. The Emperor remained silent. Terror remained distant. And in the heart of the vengeful spirit, the War Master's thoughts turned more and more to the vision of a galaxy remade, not in the Emperor's image, but in his own. The betrayal had not yet come, but its shadow stretched long across the stars. The vengeful spirit entered the Kalthan expanse under orders sealed by terror. It was a campaign meant to be swift, a clean surgical strike against the Ornek hegemony, whose fleets harried imperial shipping lanes. The Emperor's directive was clear: neutralize the threat, secure the trade routes, avoid unnecessary destruction. On parchment, the order was perfect. In practice, Horus rewrote it in silence. The War Master stood at the strategium table, the map of Ornek space glimmering in pale light. Abaddon stood at his side, armored like the black wall of a fortress. Lorgar's image flickered across the hololithic display, his voice low but calm. The Emperor asks for stability, Lorgar said. You give him victory, but you give it on your terms. That is how the new order begins. Horus did not smile. His gaze was fixed on the glowing constellations, his voice steady. The Emperor wants a secure trade route. I will give him silence in this sector. Silence bought in blood he will not see fit to count. The war began without preamble. The lunar wolves descended on the Ornek fleets with precision. The first battles were clean, ship-to-ship engagements, strikes that cut supply lines, sieges that forced surrenders. But as the campaign deepened, Horus's strategy shifted. Where Terra's order called for pacification, Horus ordered eradication. Cities that might rise again in rebellion were leveled. Rulers who might one day resist were executed without counsel. The Ornek systems were brought to heel, but in a silence born of fear, not loyalty. Reports sent back to Terra were immaculate. The trade lanes were secure. The enemy threat was eliminated. Horus's words on the communiques were precise, unassailable. But those who fought beside him, those who saw the truth, felt the change. Fulgrim's fleet joined him mid-campaign, his ships gliding into formation like blades joining a sword. The Phoenician arrived aboard the pride of the emperor, stepping onto the vengeful spirit in armor polished like a mirror. "Horus," Fulgrim greeted warmly. "You fight like a man who no longer carries chains." Horus regarded him with measured eyes. "Chains can be broken, brother, but some must be worn until the moment is right." Fulgrim's laugh was soft, knowing. "And when the moment comes?" Horus's gaze drifted to the map, where the Ornek worlds glimmered as captured prizes. "Then there will be no chains at all." The campaign ended, as all Horus's campaigns did, swiftly, decisively, absolutely. The Ornek hegemony was no more. But among the Primarchs, whispers began to grow. Perturabo spoke of the War Master's efficiency with something close to admiration. Angron, hearing of the annihilation on Ornek, praised his brother's strength. Lorgar, in quiet council, spoke of inevitability. Only Dawn sent word of unease, his message to Terra carefully couched in the language of duty. But the Emperor's silence answered all. Horus stood in the great hall of the vengeful spirit after the final victory. His legion gathered below, their armor marked by war, their banners glinting in the cold light. "You have brought the galaxy to heel," Horus told them, his voice carrying like a storm. "You have given the Emperor his peace, and in that peace, you have given him more than he knows to ask for." The cheer that rose shook the hall, a sound not of loyalty to Terra, but to the man who stood before them. After the hall emptied, Horus remained alone. Lorgar's image shimmered once more in the quiet. "They follow you because you are more than War Master, Horus. You are the leader they see, not the one they are told to serve from afar." Horus said nothing for a long time. His hand rested on the edge of the table, tracing the constellations as if feeling the pulse of the Imperium beneath them. At last, he spoke quietly. "The Emperor built an empire. I have kept it alive. Perhaps it is time I decide how it will live." Far from Calthan's space, the Emperor's Webway project continued in silence. And in the dark between stars, the first threads of rebellion began to weave themselves into a tapestry that would one day be called war. The vengeful spirit sailed from the Calthan expanse, with her holds full of victory. The Ornek systems burned in silence, their banners replaced with the sigil of the lunar wolves. But Horus's mind was no longer fixed on battles alone. Victory was not enough. A single legion, even the Emperor's favored, could not stand alone against the Imperium entire. If Horus's vision was to take form, if the Emperor's silence was to be answered, he would need brothers. The first invitations were quiet, almost innocent. Fulgrim had already walked beside him in Calthan's space. Perturabo was next, his iron warriors mired in a grinding siege along the edges of the Merrick Reach. Horus's words to him were wrapped in strategy, but seeded with something deeper. "You build walls, Perturabo," Horus said over the hololithic link, his voice a mixture of respect and weariness. "But our father builds walls on Terra as well, walls we are not permitted to see. Do you never wonder what it is he fortifies there, while you bleed for his empire?" Perturabo's eyes narrowed, his face shadowed in the grain of the transmission. "I wonder many things, Horus, and I find few answers." "Then perhaps it is time we seek them together," Horus replied. The seed was planted. Angron was different. The Red Angel cared nothing for subtlety, and less for politics. His loyalty was measured in battles fought and blood spilled. Horus reached him not with whispers of terror, but with promises of war unbound. "I have seen the Emperor's peace," Horus told him when they met briefly upon the void dock of Conqueror. It is a peace built on restraint. You were not made for restraint, Angron. You were made for the storm. I can give you more storms than terror ever will. Angron's laughter was harsh, violent. Then speak no more of peace, brother. Point me at the next war. Another seed, less subtle, but no less firm. Others were slower to draw near. Kurzi, ever a creature of shadows, spoke with Horus only briefly, his voice half warning, half approval. You walk a path lit by fire, Horus. The dark will take you before the end. Horus's answer was measured. The dark takes all of us, Conrad. I would rather meet it as master than servant. The conversation ended, but the Night Haunter's silence afterward was not refusal. Lorgar remained constant at Horus's side, his words patient, his counsel steady. The word-bearer understood better than any the slow work of turning hearts. They will not all come at once, Lorgar told him in the quiet of the strategium. They will circle, they will question, they will test your resolve. But each brother you win strengthens the truth they all know. Our father has left us to fight his wars without him. His silence is our weapon. Horus stood before the galaxy map, the constellations of the Great Crusade glimmering in light. He could see where his brothers fought, where they bled, where they questioned. Dawn will not turn, Horus said quietly. No, Lorgar agreed. Nor will Guilliman, nor Vulcan. They will stand with the Emperor until the last stone falls. But others will see the truth. Horus's gaze moved across the stars, enough to decide the fate of the Imperium. The vengeful spirit continued its course, each campaign now chosen with care, not only for victory, but for opportunity. The Lunar Wolves' deployments began to align with other legions in subtle ways. Horus fought alongside those most likely to feel the Emperor's distance, those most likely to hear a new voice when it called. To Terra, the victories were nothing but loyalty. To the War Master, they were preparation. In private, the first true council of his choosing began to form. Fulgrim, Perturabo, Angron, Lorgar. Their voices were not yet unified, but they shared one truth. The Emperor's silence was a wound that could not be ignored. They spoke of campaigns, of strategy, of duty. But beneath the surface, a different language grew, one of trust, of shared disillusionment, of quiet alignment. Still, the Emperor sent no word. The webway remained locked in secrecy. Horus did not speak openly of rebellion, not yet. But in his heart, he knew the path ahead. The galaxy was aboard, the legions, its pieces, and one by one, the pieces were moving into place. Far from the light of terror, the War Master stood before the map of the Imperium, its stars glimmering like a field of fire. It will be ours, he said softly. Lorgar's voice, calm and certain, answered from the shadows. It already is, Horus. The Emperor just doesn't know it yet. The orders from Terra came with the Emperor's seal, carried through the hand of Rogel Dawn. The compliance of the Pharanth cluster was to be swift, decisive, and bloodless where possible. The Emperor's will was simple. Bring the worlds into the fold, intact, preserve their industry, and minimize collateral destruction. Horus read the message in silence. His expression betrayed nothing, but his mind was already turning. The Pharanth cluster was fractured, its worlds locked in a cold war of rival houses, its fleet divided among mercenary captains. A campaign fought by the book would drag for years, bleeding resources the Crusade could ill spare. But a different kind of war could make the cluster bend in weeks, and more importantly, it would test his brothers. Perturabo's Iron Warriors and Angron's World Eaters were already deployed near Pharanth's base. Horus sent word that the Lunar Wolves would join them, taking nominal command as War Master. His summons to the two Primarchs was respectful, but beneath the words lay a challenge. The War Council met aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Perturabo stood over the hololithic display, tracing the Pharanth defenses with a hand that measured weaknesses like an artisan measuring stone. Angron leaned against the table, his massive frame tense with impatience. "The Emperor wants this neat," Perturabo said at last, his tone flat. "Quick, no damage to the infrastructure, diplomacy where possible." Angron snorted. Diplomacy. The houses here only understand fear. Break their fleets, take their worlds. That's diplomacy enough. Horus's eyes lingered on the map. The Emperor's orders are clear, but so is the truth. The cluster will resist as long as they believe Terra fears to break them. Perturabo looked up, suspicion in his gaze. "You mean to defy the order?" Horus's voice was calm, measured. "I mean to win the war, and to end it before it drains the crusade dry. If we must crush a few houses to make the rest kneel, we will have saved lives in the long run." Angron's grin was sharp as a blade. "Now you speak like a war master." The campaign began at once. Instead of the measured strikes outlined in Terra's directive, Horus ordered a decapitation strategy. Key Pharanth strongholds were targeted for immediate destruction, their leaders killed or captured within days. The Lunar Wolves struck with precision, their actions calculated to cause chaos in the political balance. Perturabo's Iron Warriors broke the cluster's fleet at the Battle of Karen Gate, their guns hammering the enemy into wreckage despite repeated calls for surrender. Angron's World Eaters swept through planetary defenses, their brutality both feared and effective. In 3 weeks, the cluster's resistance was shattered. The remaining houses bent knee, swearing loyalty not just to the Emperor, but to the War Master who had delivered them from ruin. The official reports to Terra spoke of rapid compliance, minimal civilian loss, and decisive leadership. On parchment, the war had been a perfect execution of the Emperor's will. But among the legions, the truth was clear. Horus had rewritten the war in his own image. Perturabo said little, but his respect for Horus deepened. The Iron Warrior saw in him not just a leader, but one who understood the necessity of strength unbound by sentiment. Angron needed no convincing. His loyalty was sealed in blood and battle. When the campaign ended, the 3 Primarchs stood aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the cluster now firmly in Imperial control. Perturabo spoke first, his tone as even as ever. "You defied the order, Horus, quietly, carefully, but you did not obey it." Horus's gaze was steady. "I obeyed the spirit of the order. The cluster is compliant. The trade routes are secure, and we have saved months of war." Angron laughed. "And Terra will thank you for it, whether they know the truth or not." Perturabo regarded Horus for a long moment. "You are not Dawn. You are not Guilliman. You are something else, and perhaps the Imperium needs that." Horus did not answer. That night, in the quiet of his private chamber, Lorgar's voice came to him over the secure vox. "You have taken the first step, Horus," Lorgar said. "You have bent the Emperor's will without breaking it. You have shown your brothers that his silence can be answered with action." Horus looked out at the stars beyond the viewport, the Pharanth cluster now just another constellation in the Imperium's map. "This was not rebellion," Horus said quietly. "No," Lorgar replied, "but it is the road to it." Far away, Terra remained silent, and in the space between silence and action, the War Master's shadow grew. The vengeful spirit drifted in high orbit over the scorched moons of the Pharanth cluster, her armor still bearing the scars of war. Victory had been clean in the eyes of terror, but among the legions that had fought, something deeper had been forged. Horus had proven that the Emperor's orders could be interpreted, and no censure had come. Now it was time to draw the circle tighter. Fulgrim came first. The Phoenicians' pride of the Emperor cut across the void to join the War Master's flagship, its arrival announced with the thunder of ceremonial gunfire. Fulgrim stepped onto the vengeful spirit in armor of silvered gold, his every movement deliberate, perfect. "You make enemies look like art, Horus," Fulgrim said with a faint smile as they walked the War Master's private hall. "The Pharanth cluster bent because you gave them no choice. I could almost believe our father himself would approve." Horus regarded him with measured eyes. "Approval is not the measure of necessity. You understand that better than most." Fulgrim's smile deepened just slightly, enough to show he understood. The conversation turned to campaigns, to mutual admiration, but beneath the polished words lay a mutual recognition. They would stand together when the time came. Perturabo followed soon after, his iron warriors rendezvousing with the lunar wolves for joint exercises. The meetings between the two Primarchs were stripped of ceremony, their words blunt as the walls the Iron Warrior built. "You command like an engineer, Horus," Perturabo said, tracing the layout of the next campaign. "Precision, calculated strength, and you are willing to strike where others hesitate." "You command like a builder," Horus replied evenly. "You understand that a structure must be reinforced before it can bear weight. I would have you at my side when the Emperor's weight grows too heavy." Perturabo's eyes narrowed slightly. "When, not if." Horus did not answer, and Perturabo did not press. But the seed took root. Angron needed no persuasion. His World-Eaters had followed the Lunar Wolves in multiple campaigns now, his berserkers unleashed with Horus's tacit approval, where the Emperor's restraint would have forbidden it. In the quiet after a battle in the Rimwood systems, Horus spoke with Angron aboard the Conqueror. "You fight as you were made to fight," Horus said, "and I will not bind that strength." Angron's laugh was sharp, almost bitter. "Our father would. He would chain me until I break. You are different, Horus. That is why I follow you." The circle was forming, but Horus knew strength alone would not decide the war to come. Some brothers needed proof, others reassurance. Mortarion was one of these. The Lord of Death was slow to trust, his loyalty grounded in pragmatism. Horus sent word to the Death Guard, arranging a meeting under the guise of coordinating a relief effort in the Ithraka subsector. Mortarion came aboard the Vengeful Spirit, his armor dull, his presence heavy with the smell of alchemical oils. "You call me here for strategy, Horus," Mortarion said as they walked the strategium floor. "Yet I feel strategy is not all you mean to discuss." Horus studied him for a long moment. "I call you here because you know the value of truth. The Emperor keeps much from us, Mortarion. Secrets on Terra, projects we are not allowed to see. I would have my brothers stand ready should those secrets threaten the crusade." Mortarion's eyes narrowed. "You speak as though the threat will come from Terra itself." "I speak," Horus replied carefully, "as one who has seen what silence can do. If the Emperor will not speak to us, then we must speak to each other." Mortarion gave no answer, but he did not refuse. Kurz was different still. The Night Haunter's loyalty was a blade in shadow. his judgment always measured against his own vision of justice. When Horus's words reached him, Kurz sent only a brief, cryptic reply. "When the night falls, you will have my answer." And that was enough. Lorgar remained constant, the quiet architect behind Horus's growing alliance. In private councils aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the word-bearer laid out the shape of the future. "They will come to you, Horus," Lorgar said. "Not all at once, not all openly, but with every campaign, with every silence from terror. Your brothers see what you see. The Emperor's dream is not theirs. It never was." Horus stood before the star map, the positions of the legions scattered across the galaxy. Fulgrim, Perturabo, Angron, already close. Mortarion, neutral but leaning. Kurz, watching. The board was nearly set. "The Emperor built his Imperium on unity," Horus said at last. "We will take it from him with the same." Lorgar's faint smile was shadowed by the flicker of the hololith. "And when the moment comes, there will be no unity left to take back." Far away, Terra's silence remained unbroken. And in that silence, Horus's circle began to tighten. The war in the Merrick Reach should have been routine. The Emperor's directive was clear. Multiple systems resisting compliance were to be pacified by a coordinated strike from the Lunar Wolves, Iron Warriors, and Emperor's children. The goal was stability, minimal disruption, and preservation of key infrastructure for integration into the wider Imperium. But Horus had not assembled his allies for routine war. The campaign was his first true test. A coordinated strike not to fulfill the Emperor's will, but to shape a war according to his own vision. The Merrick Reach was a cluster of heavily fortified worlds, each ruled by independent warlords who mistrusted one another as much as they resisted imperial compliance. Horus's plan was simple in principle, complex in execution. Divide the worlds not by diplomacy, but by calculated destruction, each legion striking in a way that displayed their unique strength. Fulgrim's Emperor's children struck first, their fleets cutting through the Reach's outlying defenses with surgical precision. Horus's instructions were clear. Make the attack beautiful, clean, and terrifying in its perfection. The Phoenician delivered, turning each engagement into a demonstration of the Imperium's cold inevitability. Perturabo's Iron Warriors followed, hammering the fortress moons of the Central Reach. His siegecraft was relentless, dismantling defenses that had stood for centuries. Yet there was no attempt at negotiation. Every fortress was reduced to rubble, every commander executed. The Lunar Wolves moved in the wake of this destruction, securing the Heart Worlds not with offers of peace, but with the full weight of inevitability. Horus's presence was a storm, decisive, unstoppable, unbound by any trace of the Emperor's carefully worded restraint. Reports sent to Terra were immaculate. The campaign appeared swift, efficient, a victory worthy of the Crusade's finest. Civilian losses were minimized on paper, infrastructure preserved in the official tally. But the truth among the legions was different. Horus's orders had been clear to his brothers. The Merrick Reach was not to be pacified in the Emperor's name alone. It was to remember who had brought it to heel. The Reach, bent in weeks. Its warlords swore loyalty, but their oaths were spoken to the War Master, the man who had stood at the center of their destruction and offered them survival. In the quiet after the final victory, Horus called his allies to a private council aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Fulgrim was in high spirits, the artistry of his legion's strike still vivid in his mind. This was more than compliance, Horus. This was perfection. The worlds bend not from fear alone, but from the knowledge that we have made their resistance meaningless. Perturabo's tone was more measured, but there was a hint of approval beneath his blunt words. Your plan was effective, brutal, efficient, and Terra will praise it without knowing the truth of how it was won. Horus looked from one to the other. This was not Terra's war. This was ours. The Emperor commands silence, and we answer him with victory. The Myric Reach is a test, and he does not even know he has set it. Angron's vox link cut in from the Conqueror, his voice harsh with satisfaction. If every war is fought like this, Horus, the galaxy will be ours before Terra even realizes what we've done. Horus's eyes darkened slightly at the word ours, but he did not correct it. Mortarian's voice followed, calm but edged with suspicion. Terra will notice eventually. They cannot ignore the pattern forever. They will notice when it is too late. Lorgar's voice replied smoothly, his image flickering in the hollow chamber. The Emperor's webway consumes him. His eyes are on Terra, not on the stars where his sons bleed. There was a moment of silence in the council, the kind that carried weight. Each Primarch there understood the truth. Every campaign fought like this brought them closer to the point of no return. Horus stepped forward, his voice steady. The Emperor built the Imperium with us, his sons, but he no longer stands with us. When the time comes, we will decide the fate of this empire, together. None spoke against him. The council ended. The allied legions dispersed, each to their next campaigns, but the bond between them had tightened. They had fought together, not as tools of terror, but as brothers united in a common cause. From Terra, there was no reprimand, no inquiry. The Myric Reach was marked in the records as one of the most efficient compliance campaigns in the Crusade's history. And in the silence that followed, Horus knew the truth. The Emperor's gaze was elsewhere. The board was almost ready. In the quiet of his chamber, Horus stood before the star map of the Imperium, the constellations shifting under his hand. "They will come to me," he said softly. Lorgar's voice, as ever, came from the shadows. "They already have." The void beyond the Myric Reach was quiet, but Horus knew peace was a lie. The campaigns had bound his allies together. Fulgrim, Perturabo, Angron, and now Mortarion moving ever closer. Kurz's shadow lingered on the edges. Lorgar, ever patient, wove the threads unseen. But trust was not enough. If Horus was to take the Imperium from the Emperor, he needed loyalty, not the brittle loyalty of oaths to Terra, but the unbreakable kind forged in secrecy, in shared cause. The summons went out quietly. No record passed through Terra's channels. No formal declaration was made. The vengeful spirit emerged from the warp at the edge of a nameless, uninhabited system. Here, in a void far from Imperial eyes, the War Master called his brothers to him. Fulgrim arrived first, his pride of the Emperor gleaming even in the starless dark. Perturabo followed, his fleet moving with grim precision. The Conqueror came next, Angron's presence like a storm at the edge of the void. Mortarion's endurance drifted into position last, its hull silent and austere. And from the dark itself came Lorgar, his fleet emerging as though it had always been waiting. They gathered in the vengeful spirit's strategium, the air heavy with expectation. "This is not a council of war," Horus began, his voice calm but edged with steel. "This is a council of brothers." Perturabo's gaze was sharp. "And what do you ask of us, Horus? We have fought your wars. We have followed your plans. What comes next?" Horus looked at each of them in turn. "You know the truth, as I do. The Emperor has turned from the Crusade. He has left the legions to bleed in his name while he hides his work on Terra. His silence speaks louder than his words ever did." Fulgrim's voice was smooth, but his eyes were intent. And you would have us speak in his place? I would have us act, Horus replied. Not in his name, but in ours. The Imperium stands because we have held it. When the time comes, it will fall to us to shape its future. Angron laughed, sharp and brutal. Speak plain, Horus. You mean rebellion. Horus did not flinch. I mean survival. Call it what you will. The chamber fell silent. Mortarion spoke at last, his tone as measured as the weight of his words. You know what you ask, Horus. This will not be war against a single world. This will be war against terror itself, against our father. Horus stepped forward, his voice low, steady, each word like a hammer blow. I have bled for the Emperor. We all have. And he has left us to fight and die, while he hides his truths. I will not see the legions thrown into ruin for his silence. I will not see brothers turned against each other by his neglect. I will stand with those who stand with me. Perturabo's eyes narrowed, but there was no anger, only calculation. And if we stand with you, what do you promise us? A future we decide, Horus said simply. Lorgar's voice came softly, yet it carried like a whisper through the room. The Emperor built an empire and called it eternal. But even the stars die. We can shape what comes after. One by one, the Primarchs gave their answer. Fulgrim's oath was smooth, but his eyes burned with ambition. I will stand with you, Horus. The Emperor has no love for perfection. Perturabo's was measured, a statement of fact. I will stand with you, if only because I know Dawn will stand against us. Angron's was as blunt as a blade. I follow war, and war follows you. That's enough. Mortarion's came last, slower, heavier. I will not fight for the Emperor's lies. If this war comes, I will not stand against you. The council ended with no formal declaration, no written pact. But the truth was set. The core of the rebellion was bound. As the fleets departed, the vengeful spirit remained in the void, silent. Horus stood alone in the Stratium, staring at the star map of the Imperium. He saw the campaigns ahead, the alignments yet to be made, the brothers yet to be tested. Istvan loomed in his mind like the shadow of a coming storm. Lorgar stepped from the shadows, as though he had been there all along. They will follow you now, Horus. When the time comes, they will not hesitate. Horus's gaze did not leave the map. Then it is time to begin shaping the war they will fight. Far away, terror remained silent, and in that silence, the seeds of heresy grew roots too deep to be torn free. The name Istvan would echo across the galaxy for millennia, but when the orders first came from Terra, they were nothing more than another compliance operation. The planet of Istvan III had risen in rebellion. Loyalist garrisons had been overthrown, imperial citizens slaughtered in the streets. The Emperor's response was swift. The traitor city-states were to be brought to heel. The Lunar Wolves, Emperor's children, Death Guard and World Eaters would lead the assault. On parchment, it was a purge. In truth, it was the beginning. The fleets assembled above Istvan, their banners still bearing the sigils of loyalty. But among their leaders, a different war was already being prepared. Horus stood in the strategium of the vengeful spirit, the surface of Istvan III projected before him. The planet's cities glimmered with fire and steel, resistance strong but fragile. Around him stood Fulgrim, Angron, and Mortarion. Perturabo's iron warriors were too far to attend, but his absence mattered little. His loyalty was not in question. This will be clean, Horus said, his voice measured. The orbital bombardment will soften the defenses. The assault will be swift, decisive. No drawn-out siege. The Emperor wants this world purged. Let us give him what he asks. Fulgrim's smile was faint, cold, and those who still cling to the Emperor's shadow among our own ranks. Horus's gaze darkened. They will be given the honor of the first wave. Let the loyalists die heroes. No one in the chamber spoke the word betrayal. It did not need to be spoken. The assault began at dawn. Loyalist elements within the Lunar Wolves, Emperor's Children, Death Guard, and World Eaters made planetfall, their hearts filled with conviction. The rebels fought fiercely, but the first wave cut through them like a blade. In the orbit above, the traitor fleets watched in silence. Then, with the surface battle raging, the order came. Cyclonic bombardment began. The sky over Istvan III burned. Loyalist warriors, still locked in combat, looked to the heavens in disbelief as fire rained down, not from the enemy, but from their own ships. Vox channels erupted in confusion, in rage, in final oaths. On the vengeful spirit, Horus stood unmoving as the reports came in. Entire companies erased in moments. Veteran captains silenced mid-plea. He felt the weight of each death, but he did not falter. They chose their loyalty, he said quietly, and so they share their fate. Fulgrim's expression was a mask of perfect composure. Angron watched in silence, his fury barely restrained, not for the act, but because he was not planetside to fight himself. Mortarion said nothing at all. When the firestorms cleared, Istvan III was a ruin. Loyalist resistance was ash. Yet even in destruction, survival persisted. A handful of loyalists had endured. Astartes, who had taken shelter in the ruins, or deep in the catacombs of the planet's cities. Horus's expression hardened when the reports reached him. "Send the legions," he ordered. "End it." The second wave made planetfall. Angron's berserkers, Mortarion's reapers, Fulgrim's blades, and Horus's own chosen. They descended not as saviors, but as executioners. The battle in the ruins was brutal, personal. Brother fought brother. The lines between loyalty and treachery burned away in the blood-soaked streets. Horus did not go down himself. He remained in orbit, directing the war with unshaken resolve. This was not a battle. It was a crucible. The legions that returned from Istvan III would be forged in betrayal, bound to him by the blood of those they had slain. Days later, the world fell silent. No loyalist remained alive. The fleets gathered once more above Istvan, their ranks now cleansed of dissent. In the Strategium, Horus addressed his brothers. The Emperor will know nothing until it is too late. We have secured the legions. We have proven our resolve. Istvan is ours, and so is the future. Fulgrim inclined his head, his voice like polished steel. The galaxy will remember this day. Mortarion's tone was flat, his words heavy, and it will remember that we crossed the line. Here, Angron only laughed, the sound echoing like the roar of a coming storm. Horus turned from the table to the star map. The next campaigns loomed large, Istvan V, the confrontation to come. But the die was cast. There was no turning back. Far away, terror remained silent. And in the silence, the first blood of the heresy had been spilled. The ashes of Istvan III had barely cooled when the next move was set into motion. Reports reached Terra that remnants of rebellion persisted deeper in the Istvan system. The Emperor's response was swift. 7 legions were dispatched to crush it utterly. Horus knew the truth. This was not a reinforcement. It was an execution. The Loyalists had begun to suspect. But Horus had planned for this. The chosen battlefield was Istvan V, a world of blackened stone and ashen plains. Its surface was a graveyard waiting to be filled. Horus's forces, lunar wolves, Emperor's children, Death Guard, World Eaters, Iron Warriors, Night Lords, and Word Bearers, took position in the drop zones, presenting the image of unity. In orbit, the second wave of Loyalist legions prepared to land: the Salamanders, Raven Guard, and Iron Hands. The trap was perfect. The Loyalists landed with precision, driving toward the traitor positions with the fury of brothers betrayed at Istvan III. Vulcan's Salamanders advanced with grim determination. Corvus Corax's Raven Guard struck with speed and precision, and Ferrus Manus's Iron Hands brought their relentless strength to bear. At first, the battle went as the Loyalists expected. Horus's front lines bent under the assault, his forces giving ground, drawing the Loyalists deeper into the killing fields. The ash plains thundered with bolter fire, the sky darkened with smoke and dust. And then the signal came. From the heights overlooking the battlefield, the Iron Warriors turned their guns, not on the enemy before them, but on the Loyalists at their side. Heavy artillery roared, raining death into the flanks of the Salamanders and Iron Hands. The Night Lords struck next, descending like shadows into the rear lines of the Raven Guard. Word Bearers surged forward, not in defense, but in slaughter. The Loyalist vanguard was caught between two fronts, traitors before them, traitors behind. Vulcan's Salamanders fought in tight formation, their flame weapons carving brief sanctuaries in the maelstrom. Corax's Raven Guard took to the skies, seeking to escape the encirclement. Ferrus Manus drove his Iron Hands forward, his hammer Forgebreaker smashing through enemy lines in search of Fulgrim. He found him. The duel between Ferrus Manus and Fulgrim would become legend. Blade and hammer clashed, the Phoenicians' perfect form meeting the Gorgons' unstoppable fury. Words were exchanged, but none could hear them over the roar of battle. In the end, Fulgrim's blade found its mark. Ferrus Manus fell, his blood soaking the blackened earth. Around them, the Loyalist lines began to collapse. The trap had closed fully. Horus watched from orbit aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the hololithic display showing the slaughter in real time. He gave no order to cease, no moment of hesitation. This was the war he had chosen, and there could be no retreat. On the surface, the massacre became complete. The Raven Guard were shattered, Corax forced to withdraw with what remained of his legion. The Salamanders fought to the last, Vulcan himself captured in the chaos. The Iron Hands were broken, their Primarch fallen. When the guns fell silent, Istvan Vive was a grave of legions. The traitor forces withdrew in formation, their banners unbroken. The Loyalists that survived did so scattered, leaderless, and marked for destruction. In the aftermath, Horus convened his inner circle aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Fulgrim stood silent, his armor still marked with Ferrus's blood. Perturabo's Iron Warriors were grim and silent, their work done. Angron paced like a caged beast, eager for the next war. Mortarian's voice broke the silence. Terra will know now. There is no more concealment. This is open war. Horus met his gaze. Good. Let them see. Let them understand what we are. Lorgar's voice was soft, but it carried. The galaxy will remember Istvan Vafi as the day the Emperor lost his sons. Horus turned to the star map. Terra lay distant, but no longer unreachable. The road was clear now. We march for the throne, Horus said. Far away, the Emperor still worked in his silence. But the galaxy roared with the truth. War had come, and it would not end until Terra itself was bathed in fire. Terra burned. The walls of the Imperial Palace stood like mountains of gold and stone, their heights scarred by bombardment, their foundations shaken by the tread of titans. The sky above was black with smoke and fire, the banners of traitor and loyalist fluttering in the same poisoned wind. Horus had come home. The War Master's fleets encircled the cradle of the Imperium. His brothers fought at his side. Fulgrim's perfection turned to horror, Perturabo's engines grinding the palace walls, Mortarian's plague fleets darkening the skies, Angron's berserkers howling in the streets. Every blow against Terra was a blow against the father who had abandoned them. Inside the palace, the Emperor worked in silence. His loyal sons, Rogel Dorn, Jagatai Khan, Sanguinius, stood against the tide. Every breach in the walls was sealed with blood, every lost courtyard retaken at a cost. But Horus pressed on. This was not a war for victory alone. It was the culmination of everything: betrayal, ambition, and the truth that the Emperor's dream could not hold. Days bled into weeks. The siege tightened. The walls fell one by one, and then came the moment. Horus withdrew his fleets suddenly, the void around Terra falling silent. Loyalist forces, bloodied but unbroken, felt the pressure lift for the first time in months. On the vengeful spirit, Horus lowered the shields of his flagship. It was an invitation. The Emperor knew the meaning. This war could end not in the grinding attrition of armies, but in the clash of father and son. The Emperor, Sanguinius, and a small honor guard teleported aboard the vengeful spirit. They found a nightmare. The ship's halls were a vision of the warp, twisted corridors of brass and bone, screams echoing from walls that pulsed like living flesh. In the heart of this madness stood Horus, clad in armor black as midnight, the eye of Horus burning upon his chest. Sanguinius reached him first. The angel of Baal, wings spread wide, faced the War Master alone. Words were exchanged, pleas, warnings, perhaps forgiveness. None would ever know. The duel was swift, brutal. Horus's blade struck true. Sanguinius fell, his blood soaking the deck. When the Emperor arrived, he found his favored son standing over the broken body of another. There were no words left. The battle that followed was beyond mortal comprehension. The War Master and the Emperor clashed in a storm of psychic power and physical fury. Horus fought not as a son, but as an equal, every blow fueled by the gods who had raised him, every strike carrying the weight of betrayal. The Emperor's power was vast, but he hesitated. Even now, he could not bring himself to destroy his son completely. Horus saw the hesitation, and he struck. The Emperor fell to one knee, his armor shattered, his body broken. And in that moment, Horus saw the truth. He saw the galaxy as it would become, the endless war, the ruin of all he had sought to create, the chains of gods who would never release him. The victory he had sought was ash in his hands. For a heartbeat, the man who had once been the Emperor's proudest son stood in silence. And the Emperor struck. The power that followed was absolute. The warp screamed, the vengeful spirit shook, and the War Master was undone. His body was shattered, his soul cast beyond the reach of the gods who had claimed him. Horus was gone. The Emperor, broken beyond healing, was carried back to Terra by Rogel Dorn. His body would be entombed upon the golden throne, his spirit bound forever to the Imperium he had built. The war was over, but its cost was beyond measure. On the decks of the vengeful spirit, silence fell. The banners of the War Master hung in tatters. His throne was empty. The galaxy moved on, but the wound remained. Horus's name would be spoken for 10,000 years, not as a hero nor as a monster alone, but as the son who had turned from the light and carried half the galaxy with him. In the deep void where the vengeful spirit once sailed, the stars seemed dimmer. The echoes of that final battle lingered, a reminder that even the brightest of the Emperor's sons could fall. And perhaps, in the silence between the stars, a whisper still remained. Not of victory, not of defeat, but of choice.